Hotel maid Elena discovered the crying infant on floor 13, right where the missing persons report said children vanished. The baby's eyes flashed gold in the dim hallway light. What she didn't know was that the vampire king had been hunting for this exact child for months, and her fingerprints were now all over the evidence. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Elena's cartwheels squeaked against the silence of floor 13 as she pushed through the dim corridor at 3:17 a.m., the fluorescent lights casting sickly shadows that made her skin look pale as old bone. The metallic smell hit her first, sweet copper mixed with something darker that made her stomach clench, and then she heard it through the heavy air, a thin wailing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She followed the sound past room 1347, her master key trembling in her fingers, until she found him lying on the burgundy carpet outside 1352, a baby no more than 6 months old with skin cold as marble and eyes like molten gold that tracked her movements with impossible focus. Elena's breath caught as she knelt beside him, her hands moving without thought to wrap him in fresh hotel linens. And the crying stopped, the instant her skin touched his, leaving only the hum of dying fluorescence and the weight of those unblinking golden eyes. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, whispering into the darkness, "Mrs. Chen, I found something on 13, a baby. No, I'm not joking." But even as she spoke the words, she felt the wrongness settling into her bones like winter cold. The baby hadn't blinked once in 10 minutes, his perfect stillness broken only by the slight rise and fall of his chest. And when Elena tried to set him down to call for help, his tiny fingers gripped her uniform with strength that seemed impossible for something so small. Vincent appeared at the end of the hallway like smoke, his security uniform pressed and proper, but his eyes held knowledge that made Elena's skin crawl as he approached with steps that made no sound on the carpeted floor. "Some things that go missing, Elena. They're supposed to stay missing," he said in a voice gentle as silk and sharp as broken glass, and she noticed for the first time that the security monitors in the elevator had shown her reflection, but never his. The baby's golden eyes followed shadows that Elena couldn't see, tracking movements in empty air while Vincent made a phone call in words that sounded like ancient whispers. And Elena realized with growing horror that Vincent hadn't been patrolling floor 13 all these months, he had been guarding it. 3 blocks away, Adrian stepped from the shadows between buildings, his coat billowing in wind that touched nothing else, and spoke into the darkness with words that carried the weight of centuries. "Bring me the child. Bring me the woman. Kill anyone else who's seen him." His voice echoing through supernatural hearing that stretched across the sleeping city like a web. Detective Martinez arrived with Dawn still hours away, her badge catching the lobby lights as she smiled with teeth too white and spoke in tones meant to soothe. "This baby was never here, Elena. You never found anything. Sign this report." But the infant's skin burned hot when Martinez approached, and Elena saw with shock that her partner cast no reflection in the polished elevator doors. Elena ran when she glimpsed the fangs, clutching the baby close as she fled through service corridors, while vampires moved with inhuman grace, but stumbled when they drew near the child, his presence seeming to weaken their supernatural abilities until Elena reached the roof where Adrian materialized from shadows below like smoke given form. He spoke with desperate hunger barely held in check, his ancient features beautiful and terrible in the pre-dawn light. "He's my son. They took him to hurt me." But when Adrian reached toward the infant, tiny fingers burned his skin, and Elena saw the truth in those golden eyes that looked at her with love and at his biological father with fear. The vampire king stepped back as sunrise painted the eastern sky, his parting words carrying promise and threat in equal measure. "You cannot run from what you've become, Elena." And she knew with bone-deep certainty that her life as a hotel maid was ending, just as something far stranger and more dangerous was beginning. Father Miguel found her at the abandoned church in the warehouse district, his weathered hands steady as he examined the baby, who aged months and hours under daylight streaming through stained glass. The boy is changing because he's choosing. Vampire children choose their nature based on who they trust most. And Elena watched in wonder as the infant spoke his first word while looking directly into her eyes. Mama. His voice clear as crystal bells. Miguel's basement archives held the truth Elena had never known she was searching for, her grandmother's photograph staring back from hunter records, with eyes the same silver gray as Elena's own. Your grandmother was the last dhampir. She chose humanity, but the bloodline doesn't die. It waits, and Elena felt something ancient stirring in her blood as darkness fell and Adrian's presence pressed against her newly awakened senses. The confrontation in the church sanctuary changed everything, Elena's dhampir nature blazing to life under threat like silver fire, her eyes flashing with power as old as the vampire bloodlines themselves. And when Adrian knelt in ancient acknowledgement, she understood that supernatural law had just rewritten itself around her transformed reality. He's not your son anymore. He chose me, Elena declared with voice strengthened by abilities she was only beginning to understand, and Adrian's response bound them all with words heavy as stone. Then you are his mother, and I am bound to protect you both. The baby now calling himself Marcus, reaching equally for both parents with trust that bridged two worlds. The vampire enemies came like shadows made flesh, surrounding the church with supernatural grace and inhuman speed. But Marcus's golden light repelled their attacks, while Elena and Adrian fought side by side, their unlikely partnership forged in battle and tempered by shared love for the child who glowed like a small sun between them. Miguel's sacrifice bought them escape into the storm drains, his final words echoing through Elena's enhanced hearing. The boy is the bridge between worlds. Protect the bridge, and as they navigated the underground darkness, Elena realized they weren't running anymore. They were preparing to fight back against those who would harm their family. The abandoned subway station became war room and sanctuary both, supernatural beings gathering around Elena's leadership, while Marcus demonstrated abilities that amplified their powers, his presence turning ancient enemies into allies united by common purpose. A vampire counselor challenged Elena's authority with centuries of pride behind his words. A dhampir leads no one, but Marcus silenced all objections with wisdom beyond his apparent years. She leads me, that should be enough. His golden eyes holding power that made even the eldest vampires step back in recognition. The assault on the government containment facility tested every alliance Elena had built, her silver dhampir aura mixing with Marcus's gold as they fought through corridors designed to hold supernatural beings, Elena's enhanced abilities matching professional hunters, while Adrian protected her flanks with deadly precision. You created your own enemy when you killed my grandmother, Elena told the facility commander as explosions lit the dawn sky, and in that moment she felt the weight of her new role settling around her shoulders like armor forged from starlight and determination. The safe house aftermath brought understanding of the larger war they had stumbled into, Marcus aging rapidly as his abilities stabilized, his laughter bringing smiles to ancient vampire faces, while Elena realized her simple act of compassion had reshattered the hidden world's foundations. The world will know about us now, Adrian said, as they watched Marcus play with shadows and light, his golden aura brightening the room like captured sunshine. And Elena's response carried the weight of new responsibility. Then we make sure they see us as protectors, not threats, her reflection now showing both human warmth and supernatural silver fire. City Hall's conference room buzzed with nervous energy as Elena negotiated the first supernatural human cooperation treaty, Marcus adding his tiny handprint beside her signature while speaking with wisdom that left hardened politicians speechless. Our mama taught us to protect people, not hurt them, his words carrying truth that transcended species boundaries. Their new apartment overlooked the city like a watchtower, Elena cooking dinner while Adrian struggled through bedtime stories, and Marcus scattered toys among ancient vampire artifacts with casual ease, the scent of home-cooked food mixing with contentment and the promise of ordinary magic. "Are we a real family now?" Marcus asked, as Elena tucked him into his first real bed, and her answer came from a heart that had learned to hold impossible love. "We always were, sweetheart. Now we just have a home," the evening light painting their chosen family in shades of gold and silver hope. 6 months later, Elena stood in her rooftop garden, watching Marcus play with both shadow and light, his abilities continuing to develop as other supernatural human hybrid children were born across the world, and she understood that her decision to protect one abandoned baby had changed everything. "Mama, will there be other children like me someday?" Marcus asked with eyes still golden, but now filled with 5-year-old curiosity instead of infant mystery. And Elena's smile held all the love and determination that had carried them through impossible battles. "Maybe, baby. Would you like that?" The city lights twinkling below like stars brought down to earth. "The world is changing because of what you started," Adrian said, as evening breeze carried scents of growing things and infinite possibility. But Elena knew better, as she watched their son bridge worlds with every laugh and gesture. "What we started, all of us." Her words carrying the promise of adventures yet to come, and a future where love could rewrite even the oldest laws. The vampire king who had searched for months had found his son, but the child had chosen his own family, and in that choosing had created something entirely new, a bridge between worlds built from hotel linens and fierce protection, from silver fire and golden light, from the simple truth that sometimes the most extraordinary families begin with one person willing to say, "This child is mine to protect." Elena glanced at the clock on City Hall's conference room wall, 4:23 p.m., as Mayor Davidson shuffled through papers with hands that trembled slightly whenever Marcus looked directly at him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table where supernatural human accords lay waiting for signatures that would change everything. Marcus sat in Elena's lap, his golden eyes calm as he drew crayon flowers on official letterhead, completely unaware that half the room's occupants had spent the morning debating whether his existence was miracle or threat. Detective Sarah Martinez, now working supernatural liaison instead of cover-up, watched from the corner with eyes that had seen too much to doubt anything anymore, her partner conspicuously absent since the night Fangs had given away secrets older than the city itself. The taste of institutional coffee mixed with ozone-sharp tension filled Elena's enhanced senses as she listened to Adrian explain vampire hierarchy to humans who kept checking mirrors to confirm his reflection was really there. Council members whispered among themselves, their voices carrying undertones of fear wrapped in bureaucratic language, while Marcus hummed softly and colored his flowers in shades that seemed to glow against the stark white paper. Elena had learned to read the micro-expressions that flitted across human faces when they first encountered the supernatural world. The slight widening of pupils, the unconscious lean backward, the way breathing patterns shifted when confronted with proof that monsters were real, but sometimes chose to protect rather than prey. Mayor Davidson cleared his throat for the third time in 5 minutes, his political instincts warring with genuine concern as he studied the treaty language that would grant supernatural beings legal recognition in exchange for cooperation with human authorities. The city's insurance department had nearly rioted when Adrian casually mentioned that vampire-related property damage would require special considerations, while the police union representatives sat in stony silence, processing the reality that some of their suspects could literally disappear into shadows. Marcus looked up from his drawing, his voice carrying that odd mixture of childlike wonder and ancient wisdom that still caught Elena off guard even months later. "Can we put the flowers in the agreement too? They're pretty, and pretty things make people less scared." The room fell silent, except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant hum of city traffic, every adult present suddenly aware that a 4-year-old had just summarized diplomatic theory better than most international relations textbooks. Elena felt Adrian's hand brush against her shoulder, a gesture of support that 6 months ago would have been impossible to imagine, his centuries of isolation slowly giving way to something that looked remarkably like family happiness. She watched him struggle with human social cues, his formal speech patterns softening when he addressed Marcus, but reverting to ancient cadences when stress made him forget to appear mortal. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but Elena had learned that love was less about perfection and more about choosing to grow together despite impossible odds. The mayor's aide, a nervous young man whose heartbeat spiked every time Adrian moved, finally worked up courage to ask the question everyone was thinking: how do we explain this to the public? The supernatural world staying hidden was one thing, but integration meant press conferences and voter education and constituent services for beings who could turn into mist or read minds or command shadows like Marcus did when he thought no one was watching. Elena stood slowly, Marcus settling more comfortably in her arms as her enhanced senses picked up the emotional currents flowing through the room like electricity before a storm. 6 months ago, she had been scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, invisible to everyone except the vampires who had been watching her family line for decades. Now she spoke for beings older than nations, her words carrying weight that could reshape laws and redefine what it meant to be human in a world where humanity was just one option among many. "We tell them the truth," Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had learned to wield, like Adrian wielded shadows, controlled and precise and utterly uncompromising when her family's safety was at stake. "We tell them that we've always been here, that we're not asking for special treatment, but for basic recognition, that our children deserve schools, and our elderly deserve medical care, and our families deserve the same protections under law that every citizen expects." Marcus held up his flower drawing, the crayoned blooms seeming to catch and hold the room's harsh lighting in ways that made several council members blink and rub their eyes. "Look, everyone gets flowers," he announced with 4-year-old logic that cut through hours of legal complexity. "Mine are gold because that's my color. Mama's are silver like her eyes when she's being fierce. And Papa's are red like his favorite coat, but not scary red, happy red like Valentine's." The mayor accepted the drawing with hands that barely shook, studying the impossible colors that seemed to shift and dance on ordinary paper, and Elena saw the exact moment when bureaucratic caution transformed into grandfather's wonder. "Thank you, Marcus," Mayor Davidson said softly, his political mask slipping to reveal genuine warmth. "These are beautiful flowers. I think they'll look perfect next to our city seal." Elena watched Adrian's reflection appear more solidly in the conference room's windows as afternoon sunlight slanted through glass, his supernatural nature adapting to Marcus's presence in ways that defied every vampire legend she had ever heard. The baby who had chosen Elena as his mother had also chosen both worlds as his inheritance: vampire strength tempered by human compassion, ancient wisdom balanced by childlike joy, golden light that could bridge any darkness. The treaty signing took less time than Elena had expected, her signature flowing across official documents while Marcus added careful fingerprints in washable ink that somehow sparkled like captured starlight. Adrian signed with elegant script that looked like calligraphy, his name carrying centuries of authority now pledged to protect rather than rule. Other supernatural representatives added their marks, each one different, some in languages that predated human writing, others in symbols that seemed to move when Elena wasn't looking directly at them. As they walked out of City Hall into late afternoon sunshine, Marcus skipping between his parents with energy that made nearby flowers bloom out of season, Elena felt the weight of what they had accomplished settling around her like a comfortable coat. The supernatural world was no longer hiding, no longer running, no longer existing in the spaces between human awareness. They were citizens now, neighbors, fellow travelers on a planet that had always been stranger and more wonderful than most people had dared to believe. The apartment that had become their sanctuary overlooked the city like a lighthouse, its windows catching the last rays of sunset as Elena prepared dinner while Adrian attempted to help, and Marcus arranged his toys in patterns that seemed random, until Elena realized they were forming protective sigils around their living space. The scent of home-cooked pasta, mixed with contentment, and the underlying ozone tang that meant Marcus was using abilities he was still learning to control. "Are we safe now?" Marcus asked, as Elena read him his bedtime story, his golden eyes already drooping with exhaustion from a day that had changed the world in small but fundamental ways. The question carried weight beyond his apparent years, echoing months of running and hiding and fighting for the right to simply exist. "We're together," Elena replied, smoothing dark hair that felt warm with more than just body heat. "That's what matters, sweetheart. We're together and we're home, and tomorrow we'll figure out whatever comes next." Marcus smiled and closed his eyes, his presence filling the room with golden light that slowly faded to comfortable darkness as sleep claimed him. Adrian found Elena on the balcony an hour later, city lights stretching out below them like fallen stars, his reflection now solid enough to join hers in the window glass behind them. "The world is going to be different now," he said quietly, his ancient voice carrying notes of wonder that Elena had learned to treasure. "Other cities are already requesting meetings. Other supernatural communities are emerging from hiding, and Marcus is going to grow up in a world where being different doesn't mean being alone." Elena leaned against the railing, feeling the cool night air against her skin and the warm presence of family in the apartment behind them, her enhanced senses picking up the contentment that radiated from their sleeping son like heat from a banked fire. 6 months ago, she had been nobody special, a hotel maid whose greatest ambition was keeping her job long enough to pay rent. Now she was mother to a child who could bridge worlds, partner to a vampire king learning to be an ordinary father, and architect of a future where love mattered more than species classification. The city below hummed with 8 million heartbeats, most of them human, but not all, and Elena understood that their greatest adventures were just beginning. Marcus would need schools that could handle supernatural education, friends who could accept golden eyes and impossible abilities, a world that could grow large enough to hold dreams that spanned both shadow and sunlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, other cities to visit, other supernatural human communities to establish, other children like Marcus, who would need advocates and protectors and examples of what was possible when ancient enemies chose to become family instead. Tonight was for quiet moments and shared contentment, for the simple miracle of a bedtime story read to a child who was loved exactly as he was. Elena smiled as Adrian's hand found hers, their reflections clear and solid in the window glass. Vampire and dhampir and sleeping golden-eyed boy, creating something entirely new in a world that was finally ready to expand its definition of family. The vampire king had searched for months, but what he had found was worth infinitely more than what he had lost. A son who chose love over blood, a partner who chose protection over power, and a future where their greatest battles would be fought not with supernatural abilities, but with patience and wisdom and the radical act of believing that everyone deserved a place to call home. Elena pressed her enhanced hearing against the bathroom door at 6:47 a.m., Marcus's excited chatter mixing with the sound of running water, as Adrian attempted to explain proper toothbrushing technique to a child whose fangs were still developing. The morning light streaming through their apartment windows caught the silver threads that had begun appearing in Elena's dark hair, physical proof of the dhampir abilities that continued evolving 6 months after that first night on floor 13. Marcus emerged from the bathroom with toothpaste foam still clinging to his chin, his golden eyes bright with the kind of mischief that usually meant he had been experimenting with abilities his parents were still learning to manage. "Papa says vampire teeth don't get cavities, but I should brush them anyway because human food is sticky," he announced while climbing onto Elena's lap at the breakfast table, his small hands warm against her arms in ways that still made her marvel at the reality of chosen motherhood. Adrian appeared in the doorway looking professionally disheveled, his ancient instincts for perfection warring with domestic chaos in ways that never failed to make Elena smile. The vampire king who had once commanded armies now struggled with cartoon character lunchboxes and permission slips for supernatural preschool, his formal speech patterns softening into something approaching normal parental exasperation when Marcus decided breakfast time was perfect for practicing shadow manipulation. The shadows danced across their kitchen walls like living things, responding to Marcus's giggling delight as he made them form animal shapes that moved with impossible grace. Elena found herself thinking about the hotel maid who had existed 6 months ago, that woman who had defined herself by invisibility and service to others, never imagining that maternal instincts could reshape entire political systems. The transformation still felt surreal some mornings when she woke to find Marcus curled between her and Adrian, his golden aura brightening their bedroom like captured sunshine, his steady breathing a reminder that love had indeed conquered ancient laws. The doorbell rang with electronic precision, interrupting Elena's contemplation as Adrian moved to answer it with vampire grace that he had never quite learned to suppress around strangers. Dr. Sarah Chen from the new Supernatural Integration Department stood in their hallway clutching a tablet and wearing the expression Elena had learned to associate with bureaucrats confronting the impossible on Tuesday mornings. Marcus has been accepted to 3 different educational programs, Dr. Chen announced without preamble, her efficiency barely masking the wonder that still colored her voice when discussing supernatural children, the Montessori School for Enhanced Abilities, the traditional kindergarten with supernatural accommodations, and the specialized program for hybrid development. Elena watched Marcus's reaction to the news, his golden eyes processing information with intelligence that sometimes made her forget he was chronologically only 8 months old, despite his 4-year-old development. The rapid aging had stabilized, Father Miguel had explained before his death. Vampire children mature quickly, until they reach the developmental stage that matches their emotional needs, and Marcus had clearly decided that 4 years old was perfect for exploring the world with fearless curiosity. "Which school has the best playground?" Marcus asked, with priorities that proved his emotional age was exactly where it appeared to be, his ability to cut through adult complexity never failing to remind Elena why children often understood truth better than their elders. Dr. Chen consulted her tablet with professional thoroughness, her heartbeat steady in ways that suggested she had grown comfortable working with supernatural families over the past months. The Montessori program has indoor and outdoor facilities designed specifically for children with enhanced abilities, she explained while Marcus listened with the focused attention he gave to subjects that interested him. They have teachers trained in supernatural development and other students who understand what it's like to be different. But the traditional kindergarten offers better social integration with human children, and the hybrid program has resources we're still developing based on Marcus's unique needs. Elena felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders like familiar armor, her enhanced senses picking up the emotional undercurrents flowing between all the adults in the room. 6 months of supernatural politics had taught her that every choice carried implications beyond the obvious, that Marcus's education would become a model for other supernatural children being born across the world. Adrian moved to stand behind Marcus's chair, his protective instincts engaged by discussion of their son's future in ways that transformed ancient authority into very modern parental concern. "The boy should have options," Adrian said carefully, his accent carrying traces of centuries when he was thinking deeply about important matters. "He should understand both worlds he will inherit, human friendship and supernatural heritage, ordinary childhood and the responsibilities that come with his abilities." Marcus looked up at both his parents, with eyes that held wisdom and mischief in equal measure, his small face serious as he processed the implications of choices that would shape his development. "Can I visit all 3 schools before we decide?" he asked, with 4-year-old logic that cut straight to the practical solution. "I want to see which one feels like home the way our apartment feels like home when we're all together." Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet while Elena marveled once again at Marcus's instinct for finding simple answers to complex problems, his emotional intelligence consistently surprising adults who expected supernatural children to be either more or less human than ordinary kids. The school visits were scheduled for the following week, each program eager to accommodate the child, who had become a symbol of supernatural human cooperation. Elena understood that Marcus's educational choice would influence policy decisions in dozens of cities, that his success or struggles would be studied by researchers trying to develop frameworks for integrating supernatural children into human society. The weight of that responsibility might have been crushing if Elena hadn't learned to focus on what mattered most, giving Marcus the childhood he deserved while preparing him for the unique role his abilities and heritage had thrust upon him. After Dr. Chen left with promises to coordinate the school visits, Elena found herself studying Marcus as he played with toys that somehow arranged themselves in protective patterns around their living room. His laughter echoed off the walls like music, supernatural acoustics making ordinary sounds carry notes of joy that seemed to brighten the very air around him. Adrian settled beside Elena on the couch, his reflection now solid and permanent in every mirror, his presence no longer carrying the dangerous edge that had once defined vampire royalty. Months of domestic life had transformed him in ways that defied every supernatural legend Elena had ever heard, ancient authority evolving into something that looked remarkably like devoted fatherhood. "He worries about fitting in," Adrian observed quietly, his enhanced hearing having caught nuances in Marcus's questions that human ears might have missed. "He understands that other children see him as different, that his abilities make some people uncomfortable, but he still wants to belong somewhere beyond our family circle." Elena watched Marcus guide shadows into forming elaborate castles that glowed with golden light from within, his unconscious use of abilities that most supernatural beings spent decades learning to control. The innocence of childhood mixed with ancient power in ways that sometimes took her breath away, reminding her daily that ordinary parenting advice had limited application when your 4-year-old could manipulate light itself. "He belongs everywhere and nowhere," Elena said softly, her enhanced senses picking up the contentment that radiated from Marcus like warmth from a fireplace. "That's what makes him special, Adrian. He doesn't have to choose between worlds because he carries both of them inside himself." The afternoon passed in ordinary magic, Marcus helping Elena prepare lunch while Adrian attempted to understand why Cartoon Networks required such complex scheduling arrangements. The domesticity felt surreal sometimes, Elena's memory flashing back to that night 6 months ago, when she had wrapped a crying infant in hotel linens and inadvertently changed the course of supernatural history. The baby who had been abandoned on floor 13 was now a child who bridged worlds with every laugh and question, who made ancient vampires smile and nervous bureaucrats relax, who turned every ordinary moment into proof that love could indeed rewrite the oldest laws. As evening approached, Elena began preparing for the monthly dinner that had become tradition. Supernatural community leaders gathering around their dining table to share food and discuss integration challenges in ways that would have been impossible before Marcus taught them all that family was more important than species classification. Adrian emerged from the kitchen, carrying plates with vampire grace, while Marcus arranged napkins in patterns that somehow managed to be both aesthetically pleasing and subtly protective. The apartment filled with scents of home-cooked food and supernatural contentment as their guests began arriving, each one bringing updates from communities across the globe that were following the model Elena and Adrian had established. Councilwoman Victoria arrived first, her ancient authority softened by months of watching Marcus treat her like the grandmother she had never expected to become. Dr. James Rodriguez, from the Human Integration Task Force, brought flowers that Marcus immediately declared were almost as pretty as the ones in his treaty drawing. Father O'Brien, from the Interfaith Supernatural Outreach Program, carried blessed bread that didn't burn Adrian's hands, proof that holy symbols were adapting to new realities, just like everything else. The dinner conversation flowed between languages and centuries. policy discussions interrupted by Marcus asking if vampires could get hiccups and whether dhampirs were allowed to eat ice cream before vegetables. Elena listened to reports from other cities where supernatural human cooperation agreements were being negotiated, each one building on the foundation they had established here in this apartment that had become an unlikely center of diplomatic revolution. Marcus fell asleep in Elena's lap sometime between dessert and coffee, his golden aura dimming to comfortable warmth as exhaustion claimed him despite his best efforts to stay awake for grown-up conversation. Elena carried him to his bedroom, tucking him under covers that somehow always managed to arrange themselves in perfect comfort around his small form. His room had become a sanctuary, where shadows danced with light in patterns that spoke of security and love, where toys from both worlds coexisted in harmony that reflected the peace he carried within himself. "Good night, sweetheart," Elena whispered against his dark hair, breathing in the scent of childhood and infinite possibility. "Tomorrow we'll visit schools and you can decide where you want to learn about being exactly who you are." Marcus stirred just enough to mumble a response that sounded like love mixed with dreams, his trust so complete that Elena felt her heart expand to hold the miracle of it. She returned to find their guests preparing to leave, each one stopping to thank her for hosting dinners that had become essential to supernatural community building. The apartment grew quiet as evening deepened into night, dishes washed and put away, while Adrian and Elena settled onto their balcony to watch city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. 6 months, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying wonder that hadn't faded despite all the changes they had navigated together. 6 months since I found him crying on floor 13, and now look at everything that's different. Adrian's hand found hers in the darkness, their reflections clear in the window glass behind them, as supernatural abilities that had once defined them as enemies now worked in harmony to protect the family they had chosen. The Vampire King had searched for months, but what he had found was worth infinitely more than what he had been seeking. A son who chose love over bloodline, a partner who chose growth over safety, and a future where their greatest victory was measured not in battles won, but in bedtime stories, read to a child who knew himself beloved. The city hummed with 8 million heartbeats, most of them human, but not all, and Elena understood that Marcus's education decision would be just one more step in the journey they had begun, when love proved stronger than ancient law. Tomorrow would bring school visits and policy meetings and the 1,000 small choices that shape a child's world, but tonight was for quiet moments and shared contentment, for the simple miracle of family chosen by hearts that refused to recognize species as barriers to belonging. Elena smiled as Marcus's golden light dimmed to comfortable darkness, her enhanced senses picking up his dreams that seemed to glow with possibilities too beautiful for ordinary sleep. The hotel maid was gone forever, replaced by something she never could have imagined. A mother whose love had reshaped supernatural law, and a woman whose courage had proven that the most extraordinary families sometimes begin with nothing more complicated than one person willing to say, "This child is mine to protect." Elena stood in her apartment kitchen at 7:23 a.m., watching Marcus attempt to butter toast with telekinetic precision while Adrian consulted his ancient leather-bound calendar against a smartphone calendar that kept sending him notifications he didn't understand. The morning light caught the silver streaks in her hair that had appeared overnight after yesterday's diplomatic crisis, her dhampir abilities evolving in response to stress, in ways that still surprised her 6 months after that first transformation in the church. Marcus had grown again, now appearing roughly 6 years old, despite being chronologically 10 months, his golden eyes focused with the intensity he brought to mastering new skills, whether they involved supernatural abilities or ordinary childhood tasks. The toast rose gently into the air, rotating slowly as Marcus guided butter across its surface with concentration that made his tongue peek out between his lips, a gesture so perfectly normal that Elena's heart clenched with protective love. "Papa, your phone is making angry buzzing sounds," Marcus observed without looking away from his floating breakfast, his matter-of-fact tone suggesting he found Adrian's technology struggles more amusing than concerning. Adrian glared at the device with the expression he once reserved for enemy armies. His centuries of authority no match for push notifications from the Supernatural Integration Committee. The phone buzzed again with electronic insistence, displaying a message that made Adrian's reflection flicker slightly in the kitchen window. Elena felt her enhanced senses pick up his tension before he spoke, the metallic taste of worry mixing with the scent of coffee and morning sunshine. "There's been an incident in Chicago," Adrian said carefully, his formal speech patterns returning when stress made him forget to sound human. "3 supernatural families were attacked last night, their children taken by what witnesses describe as organized human militias. The Vampire Council is convening an emergency session, and they're requesting our presence." Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders like armor, her role as supernatural diplomat never allowing for purely domestic mournings when other families faced the dangers she had learned to navigate. Marcus's toast landed gently on his plate as his concentration shifted to the adult conversation. His emotional intelligence advanced enough to understand when serious matters required attention. "Are the children hurt?" Marcus asked with 6-year-old directness that cut through diplomatic complexity, his golden eyes darkening with concern that proved his empathy was developing as quickly as his abilities. "We don't know yet," Elena replied honestly, having learned that Marcus responded better to truth than to reassuring lies that he could sense anyway. "But Papa and I are going to help find them and make sure they get back to their families." The flight to Chicago left at noon, Dr. Chen from the Integration Department meeting them at the airport with files that made Elena's stomach clench with familiar dread. The missing children ranged in age from toddler to teenager, all from families that had registered under the new supernatural human accords, their information somehow accessed by militants who had planned the coordinated strikes with military precision. Marcus sat between Elena and Adrian on the plane, his presence somehow managing to calm nearby passengers who seemed inexplicably more relaxed when his golden aura brightened the cabin air. He colored in activity books while listening to adult conversations with attention that reminded Elena daily that his apparent childhood masked intelligence and wisdom that sometimes took her breath away. The Chicago supernatural community had established headquarters in a converted cathedral, stained glass windows casting rainbow patterns across walls lined with both ancient texts and modern computer equipment. Elena walked through doors that had once been solely human territory, now transformed into sanctuary for beings who were learning to exist openly in a world that was slowly expanding its definition of normal. Councilwoman Chen, no relation to the integration specialist, met them in the cathedral's main hall with exhaustion written across features that had witnessed centuries, but never crimes quite like these. "The attackers knew exactly where to find us," she said without preamble, her ancient authority sharpened by maternal fury that transcended species boundaries. "They had addresses, schedules, security codes, information that should have been impossible to obtain through normal channels." Elena felt Marcus's small hand slip into hers as they processed the implications, his supernatural senses picking up emotional undercurrents that spoke of betrayal and systematic hunting. The thought that someone within their integration program might be feeding information to extremist groups made her enhanced hearing pick up heartbeats that spiked with fear and anger throughout the cathedral. Adrian studied surveillance footage on tablets that showed masked figures moving with training that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds, their coordination speaking of planning that had taken months to execute. The attacks had been precisely timed to separate children from protectors, using knowledge of supernatural abilities to neutralize parents before taking offspring, whose unique natures made them valuable for reasons Elena didn't want to contemplate. "We need to expand our security protocols," Adrian said with the voice that had once commanded vampire armies, his paternal instincts engaged by threats to any supernatural children now that Marcus had taught him what fatherhood meant. "But first, we find these children and bring them home." The search began immediately, Elena's dhampir abilities allowing her to track supernatural signatures across the city, while Marcus's unique sensitivity to other children's distress provided leads that conventional investigation might have missed. They moved through Chicago's underground tunnels and abandoned buildings, following traces of fear and supernatural energy that led deeper into a conspiracy that chilled Elena's blood with its scope and organization. The warehouse they finally located looked ordinary from the outside. Industrial architecture hiding technologies that Elena's enhanced senses identified as specifically designed to contain supernatural beings. Motion detectors calibrated to vampire speed, lighting systems that would blind enhanced vision, air filtration that could distribute substances toxic to specific supernatural metabolisms. Marcus stayed close to Elena as they approached the building, his golden eyes reflecting emergency lighting in ways that made shadows dance with protective intent around their small group. The children were inside. Elena could sense their terror and confusion through bonds that connected all supernatural families, whether related by blood or choice. The rescue operation required coordinating local supernatural communities with human authorities who were still learning to navigate joint operations. Detective Martinez flying in from their home city to liaise between species with experience earned through months of integration work. Elena found herself leading strategy sessions in abandoned subway stations, her hotel-maid background somehow providing perfect training for coordinating complex logistics under pressure. Adrian commanded supernatural forces with ancient authority, while Elena managed human cooperation. Their partnership now evolved enough to function seamlessly, even in crisis situations. Marcus contributed by maintaining emotional stability among stressed adults, his presence somehow calming fears and focusing attention on solutions rather than panic. The assault on the warehouse came at dawn. Elena's team, moving with coordination that would have been impossible before months of supernatural human cooperation, had taught them to function as unified force, rather than separate species, protecting individual interests. She felt her dhampir abilities surge as protective instincts engaged, silver light mixing with Marcus's golden aura to create illumination that seemed to strengthen every supernatural being in their vicinity. The children were found in containment cells designed to study supernatural abilities, their captors having conducted experiments that filled Elena with rage so pure it temporarily overwhelmed her enhanced senses. Marcus ran to the youngest victims while Elena coordinated medical response, his natural empathy somehow able to calm children whose trust in adults had been shattered by systematic abuse. The drive back to the cathedral felt like victory and failure combined. Rescued children reunited with families, while evidence of broader conspiracy suggested similar operations in cities across the country. Elena held a toddler whose vampire heritage had manifested early, his tiny fangs visible as he slept against her shoulder, with trust that reminded her why this work mattered more than personal safety. Marcus distributed drawings he had created on the plane, crayon artwork that somehow managed to make traumatized children smile despite everything they had endured. His natural ability to bridge worlds extended to bridging trauma and healing, his presence offering proof that supernatural children could grow up safe and loved when communities chose protection over persecution. The emergency council session that evening brought together supernatural leaders from across North America, Elena finding herself addressing concerns that ranged from immediate security to long-term policy implications. The attacks had revealed vulnerabilities in integration programs that needed addressing before other extremist groups could exploit similar weaknesses. Adrian stood beside her as she spoke, his ancient authority lending weight to proposals for expanded protection protocols and enhanced screening procedures for anyone with access to supernatural family information. Marcus fell asleep in Elena's lap during testimony that stretched past midnight, his golden aura dimming to comfortable warmth as exhaustion finally claimed him, despite his determination to stay awake for important grown-up business. The flight home carried rescued children and their families, Elena's enhanced hearing picking up whispered conversations about moving to safer cities or returning to hiding rather than risking continued exposure through integration programs. The attacks had shaken confidence that had taken months to build, forcing every supernatural family to weigh safety against the freedom that legal recognition was supposed to provide. Marcus woke as their plane descended toward home, his golden eyes immediately seeking Elena's face for reassurance that the world was still secure despite everything they had witnessed. "Are we safe now?" he asked with 6-year-old directness, his question echoing concerns that every supernatural family was processing in the wake of coordinated violence. "We're together," Elena replied with the answer that had become her standard response to fears that could never be completely eliminated. "That's what matters most, sweetheart. We're together, and we keep making the world safer for all children like you." The apartment felt like sanctuary when they finally returned, familiar scents and comfortable furniture offering stability after days of crisis response and emergency coordination. Elena tucked Marcus into his own bed with relief that bordered on worship, his room's protective shadows welcoming them home with patterns that spoke of security and belonging. Adrian found Elena on their balcony hours later, city lights stretching below them like fallen stars, while her enhanced senses processed the night sounds of 8 million heartbeats, most human, but not all. The attacks had changed something fundamental in the supernatural community, introducing fears that couldn't be legislated away and requiring responses that went deeper than policy adjustments. "We can't protect them all," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness to touch the deeper weariness of responsibility for lives that depended on decisions she made in conference rooms and emergency sessions. "But we can make it harder for anyone to hunt them, and we can make sure they know they're not alone when dangers emerge." Adrian's hand found hers in the darkness, their reflections visible in window glass that had become mirror for changes that continued reshaping them both. The Vampire King had learned fatherhood through crisis and joy in equal measure, his ancient nature evolving to encompass protective love that transcended species boundaries or traditional authority structures. Elena understood that their greatest battles would always involve protecting children who deserved ordinary childhoods, despite extraordinary abilities, that their success would be measured not in political victories, but in bedtime stories, read to kids who slept safely because adults chose courage over comfort. The city hummed with life that included supernatural families learning to navigate integration, while extremist groups planned violence that required constant vigilance to prevent. Tomorrow would bring new security protocols and policy discussions, and the thousand small choices that determined whether supernatural children grew up in freedom or fear. Tonight was for quiet moments and recovered strength, for the miracle of Marcus sleeping peacefully in his own bed while rescued children across the continent began healing with their families. Elena smiled as golden light dimmed to comfortable darkness, her enhanced senses picking up dreams that seemed to glow with resilience too beautiful for ordinary sleep. The hotel maid was gone forever, replaced by someone who had learned that loving one abandoned child meant fighting for the safety of all children. That family was measured not in blood relations, but in willingness to stand between innocent lives and those who would harm them for being different. Elena pressed her back against the hotel service elevator's metal wall at 3:17 a.m., the abandoned baby's golden eyes reflecting fluorescent light in ways that made her breath catch with recognition she couldn't name. The infant's cries had stopped the moment she lifted him from floor 13's blood-stained carpet, his unnaturally cold skin warming against her chest, while silence settled around them like held breath. Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through Elena's phone with static that seemed to bend around the baby's presence, the supervisor's usual efficiency faltering when faced with Elena's report of finding something impossible in a place that wasn't supposed to exist on any hotel blueprint. The baby hadn't blinked once in 10 minutes, Elena realized as the elevator descended past floors that shouldn't have been accessible, his golden gaze tracking shadows that moved independently of any light source she could identify. Vincent waited in the basement with knowledge he shouldn't have possessed. His reflection absent from security monitors while missing children, posters filled desk drawers that Elena had never seen him open during 3 years of late-night encounters. "Some things that go missing are supposed to stay missing," Vincent said in a voice that carried accents from languages Elena couldn't recognize, his phone call conducted in whispers that made the baby's eyes brighten with light that had nothing to do with electricity or flame. The discovery had triggered responses across the city before Elena understood what she was holding. Police units being redirected while birth records altered themselves in computer systems that shouldn't have been accessible to whoever was rewriting official reality. Vampire King Adrian received the news in cathedral shadows where his reflection should have been but wasn't. Ancient desperation warring with calculated restraint, as centuries of searching crystallized into coordinated movement that would bring him to Elena's location within hours, rather than the months that previous leads had required. Detective Martinez arrived with a partner whose fangs became visible when fluorescent lights flickered in patterns that suggested supernatural interference. Elena's growing certainty that authority couldn't be trusted, mixing with protective instincts that made her run when she realized the baby's safety depended on her willingness to become fugitive. The hotel's hidden passages revealed staff members who moved with inhuman grace, but stumbled when the baby's presence disrupted abilities that should have made them impossible to escape. Elena's human limitations, somehow enhanced by golden light that grew brighter whenever danger approached. Adrian materialized on the rooftop, at pre-dawn, with paternal desperation that transcended species boundaries, his ancient sadness visible in light, that forced him to retreat before sunrise could destroy the reunion he had spent months orchestrating through networks that spanned continents. "You cannot run from what you've become." Adrian's parting words followed Elena into sanctuary that Father Miguel provided in deconsecrated church, where stained glass cast rainbow patterns across dusty tomes that revealed her grandmother's name in vampire hunter records. The baby aged rapidly during daylight hours while Elena researched bloodlines that connected her to supernatural heritage she had never suspected. Dhampir abilities beginning to manifest as ancient texts explained laws older than nations that governed adoption through supernatural bonds rather than biological relationship. Elena's eyes flashed silver when Adrian returned to the church at nightfall, her transformation complete as protective fury awakened abilities that forced the Vampire King to kneel in acknowledgement of bonds that made her the child's chosen mother, regardless of blood or birth. The power dynamic shifted completely as ancient adoption laws bound all three of them together. Elena's new role as supernatural parent, creating alliance with Adrian, while drawing attention from factions that saw Dhampir resurrection as either opportunity or threat, requiring elimination. Vampire enemies attacked the church with human authorities surrounding the area, Miguel's sacrifice ensuring their escape into storm drains, where Elena realized they were no longer running, but planning to fight back against systematic persecution that had targeted her family for 60 years. The assault on the government containment facility tested every ability Elena had developed, an alliance she had forged, supernatural beings uniting behind Marcus as symbol of hope, while Elena proved herself as leader who could coordinate resistance against those who would experiment on children for being different. Victory came with costs that Elena was still learning to process 6 months later. Her transformation from hotel maid to supernatural diplomat complete as she navigated education decisions for Marcus, while managing integration programs that other cities were adopting as models for coexistence. The Chicago crisis had revealed vulnerabilities in protection systems Elena thought she had perfected, extremist groups using inside information to coordinate attacks that forced every supernatural family to weigh safety against freedom that legal recognition was supposed to guarantee. Marcus's presence somehow calmed rescued children whose trust had been shattered by systematic abuse, his natural empathy bridging trauma and healing, while Elena coordinated responses that prevented similar operations in other cities. The flight home carried families whose courage in maintaining integration despite targeted violence reminded Elena daily that her personal victory meant nothing if other children faced dangers. She had learned to survive through combination of enhanced abilities and chosen family that refused to be separated by species classification. Elena stood on her apartment balcony, watching city lights that included supernatural families, learning to navigate visibility, while extremist groups planned violence requiring constant vigilance to prevent. Her enhanced senses processing 8 million heartbeats that proved coexistence was possible when communities chose protection over persecution. Adrian's hand found hers in darkness that reflected their growth from desperate strangers to devoted co-parents. The Vampire King's ancient authority evolved into something that looked remarkably like ordinary fatherhood, despite abilities that defied every legend Elena had encountered in research that revealed her own supernatural heritage. Marcus slept peacefully in his own bed while rescued children across the continent began healing with families who had learned that love was stronger than fear, his golden aura dimming to comfortable warmth that somehow strengthened protective barriers around everyone who called him family. Tomorrow would bring new security protocols and policy discussions that determined whether supernatural children grew up in freedom or hiding, Elena's role as bridge between worlds requiring decisions that balanced immediate safety against long-term integration goals that other communities were watching carefully. The hotel maid was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that protecting one abandoned child meant fighting for the safety of all children. That family was measured in willingness to stand between innocent lives and those who would harm them for extraordinary abilities that made them targets rather than treasures. Elena smiled as golden light settled into dreams that seemed to glow with resilience too beautiful for ordinary sleep, her enhanced hearing picking up the steady rhythm of breathing that reminded her daily that some discoveries change everything, while proving that love was indeed the most powerful force in any world where children needed protection more than they needed to be normal. Elena stared at the conference room's fluorescent lights that hummed with frequency, designed to disorient supernatural senses. Her dhampir vision adjusting automatically to reveal Mayor Harrison's elevated heart rate and the metallic taste of fear that seasoned every word he spoke. Marcus sat beside her drawing pictures of stick figures holding hands, his 6-year-old appearance masking wisdom that sometimes made Elena forget he had existed for less than a year, despite the accelerated development that kept surprising everyone who witnessed supernatural childhood unfold at impossible speed. Adrian maintained careful distance from the holy water that someone had strategically placed near the conference table, his ancient diplomatic experience evident in how he navigated human political theater while managing abilities that could accidentally influence minds if his concentration slipped. The Supernatural Human Cooperation Treaty represented months of negotiation between species that had spent centuries viewing each other as predators or prey. Elena's role as translator, requiring her to explain vampire law to human officials while teaching supernatural beings how democracy functioned when authority wasn't inherited through blood or conquest. Marcus looked up from his artwork when tension in the room spiked beyond his comfort level, golden eyes reflecting institutional lighting in ways that made nervous humans unconsciously relax, while Elena felt her protective instincts sharpen in response to his emotional radar, detecting hostility, disguised as professional skepticism. "How do we know you won't turn on us?" Mayor Harrison asked with bluntness that cut through diplomatic language to reveal fears that no amount of legal documentation could completely address. His question echoing concerns that every integration meeting had raised in cities across the country. "Because our mama taught us to protect people, not hurt them," Marcus replied with matter-of-fact certainty that carried weight beyond his apparent age, his tiny handprint already prepared to sign beside Elena's signature on documents that would change how supernatural beings existed within legal frameworks designed for purely human communities. Elena watched Adrian process the word mama, with expression that suggested ancient grief healing in ways that fatherhood through supernatural adoption had made possible. His relationship with Marcus deepened by shared protection rather than diminished by biological distance that species difference might have been expected to create. "We're offering partnership, not domination," Elena said, while tasting institutional coffee that couldn't mask the scent of possibility mixed with lingering prejudice that time and positive examples would slowly erode through daily interactions between neighbors who happened to have different physiological capabilities. The treaty signing took place at sunset, when both human and vampire officials could function at optimal capacity, Marcus's golden aura brightening the room, while Elena's silver dhampir energy created illumination that seemed to strengthen everyone present regardless of their supernatural status or complete humanity. City Hall's steps filled with news crews and curious citizens who represented the broader community that would ultimately determine whether integration succeeded through acceptance or failed through fear that legislation alone could never overcome completely. Elena held Marcus's hand as they descended into crowds that included both supporters carrying welcome signs and protesters whose angry chants reminded her that changing laws was easier than changing hearts shaped by centuries of mutual suspicion and carefully taught hatred. The apartment felt like sanctuary after public exposure that left Elena's enhanced senses processing hundreds of opinions, ranging from cautious optimism to violent hostility. Her role as supernatural representative requiring strength that went beyond physical abilities to encompass emotional resilience that protected Marcus from adult conflicts he shouldn't have to navigate alone. Adrian helped with dinner preparation while struggling with modern appliances that confused him more than ancient blood magic ever had, his domestic education proceeding slowly but steadily, as Elena taught him that family involvement meant more than protection and included ordinary tasks like chopping vegetables and reading bedtime stories about heroes who solved problems without violence. Marcus demonstrated supernatural abilities by making salt shakers dance while simultaneously displaying perfectly normal 6-year-old behavior through complaints about vegetables and requests for extra dessert, his dual nature requiring parenting strategies that no handbook had ever addressed because Dhampir children raised by supernatural adoption were unprecedented in recorded history. "Are we a real family now?" Marcus asked, while Elena tucked him into bed surrounded by toys that coexisted peacefully with ancient vampire artifacts that Adrian contributed to their shared household. His question reflecting security needs that went deeper than legal documentation or public recognition. "We always were, sweetheart," Elena replied with certainty, earned through months of crisis and joy that had taught her family was defined by choice and commitment rather than biology or species classification, her enhanced hearing picking up Adrian's quiet satisfaction from the kitchen where he finished cleaning dishes with methodical precision. "Now we just have a home," Elena continued while adjusting blankets that Marcus had learned to heat with golden light during nightmares about government facilities or extremist attacks. His supernatural abilities balanced by perfectly ordinary needs for comfort and reassurance that bedtime routines provided better than any legal protection. Elena found Adrian on the balcony, later examining city lights that included supernatural families learning to exist openly while human neighbors adjusted to revelations that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world's population and possibilities. The integration process was proceeding more smoothly than Elena had dared hope 6 months earlier, when rescue operations and diplomatic crises had consumed every moment. But success brought new responsibilities that required constant attention to details that could determine whether other communities attempted similar cooperation or returned to centuries-old patterns of mutual avoidance. "Other cities are requesting consultation meetings," Adrian reported while reviewing correspondence that arrived daily from supernatural communities worldwide. His ancient network of contacts now focused on peaceful coexistence rather than the territorial disputes that had once occupied vampire politics across continents. Elena nodded while processing reports that suggested their model was spreading faster than anticipated. Integration programs being adapted for different regional needs while maintaining core principles that prioritize child welfare and community safety over traditional hierarchies that had previously governed supernatural society. Marcus's continued development was attracting attention from researchers who wanted to study hybrid supernatural abilities. But Elena's protective instincts ensured that her son's privacy remained intact despite scientific interest in his unique capacity to bridge species differences through natural empathy and inherited power. The future stretched ahead, filled with policy meetings and security briefings and the thousand ordinary moments that defined family life when children needed homework help and bedtime stories regardless of their supernatural abilities or political significance. Elena's role as mother, somehow more important than her diplomatic responsibilities, despite public recognition. Elena smiled while watching Adrian attempt to understand streaming services with the same determination he had once brought to ancient blood magic. His domestic education proceeding with endearing earnestness that proved even vampire royalty could learn to navigate ordinary fatherhood when motivated by love that transcended species boundaries. Marcus called from his bedroom, requesting one more story about brave children who protected others, his voice carrying sleepy contentment that reminded Elena daily why every battle had been worth fighting and every sacrifice had been meaningful in ways that political victories could never fully encompass. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as integration expanded beyond their city to encompass national policy discussions that would determine whether supernatural beings achieved full legal equality or remained second-class citizens, subject to restrictions that fear might impose despite documented evidence of peaceful coexistence. Tonight was for quiet family moments and the miracle of ordinary happiness that Elena had never imagined possible during those terrifying hours when she first found an abandoned baby whose golden eyes had changed her world in ways that continued expanding beyond anything she could have predicted. The hotel maid was completely gone now, replaced by someone who had learned that protecting one child meant changing society itself. That family was indeed the foundation for every other form of love and cooperation that made coexistence possible between beings who shared the world despite different abilities and needs. Elena's enhanced senses picked up Marcus's breathing, settling into sleep patterns that glowed with contentment too beautiful for ordinary dreams. His presence somehow making their apartment feel like the safest place on earth, despite ongoing threats that required constant vigilance to prevent. Adrian joined her on the balcony with tea that steamed in cool night air, while city sounds included both human and supernatural activity. Their partnership evolved into something that looked remarkably like ordinary marriage, despite ancient laws and political responsibilities that connected their personal happiness to broader community welfare. 6 months later, Elena stood in her rooftop garden, watching sunset paint the sky, while Marcus played with both shadow and light, his development now equivalent to a 5-year-old despite chronological age that defied every child development chart that human medicine had created for purely biological growth patterns. The supernatural school that Marcus would start attending next week included children from various species backgrounds, Elena's integration work having expanded beyond vampire-human cooperation to encompass the full spectrum of supernatural beings who were emerging from centuries of hiding into communities prepared to accept difference as strength rather than threat. Adrian's proposal for expanding cooperation programs internationally sat on Elena's desk beside invitations from governments worldwide who wanted to implement similar integration models. Her expertise now recognized as essential for any successful attempt to bridge species differences through policy that prioritized understanding over suspicion. Marcus ran to Elena with flowers he had encouraged to bloom out of season, his natural connection to growing things, somehow linked to his role as bridge between supernatural species and human communities that were slowly learning to see magic as gift rather than danger. "Mama, will there be other children like me someday?" Marcus asked, while settling into Elena's lap with trust that remained absolute, despite everything they had survived together. His question reflecting hopes that went beyond personal security to encompass broader possibilities for supernatural families. "Maybe baby," Elena replied while breathing in evening air that carried scents of growing things and possibility, her enhanced senses detecting changes in the world that suggested their work was creating space for others to emerge safely from hiding that had protected them but also limited their potential contributions to communities that needed their unique abilities. "Would you like that?" Elena continued, while watching Adrian approach with expression that mixed ancient authority with devoted fatherhood. His transformation perhaps even more dramatic than her own journey from hotel worker to supernatural diplomat who was reshaping international law through precedents they established daily. "The world is changing because of what you started," Adrian said, while joining their garden sanctuary that overlooked city lights, now including openly supernatural businesses and community centers that served mixed populations with services designed for diverse physiological needs. "What we started," Elena corrected while feeling Marcus's golden aura strengthen in response to their combined presence. Her understanding of family now expanded to encompass chosen bonds that proved stronger than biology or species classification when tested by genuine love and shared commitment to protecting innocent lives. "All of us," Elena added while watching Marcus play with both shadow and light in ways that demonstrated abilities that were still developing along pathways that no previous research had documented. His future somehow containing possibilities for bridging differences that extended far beyond the supernatural human cooperation they had already achieved. Elena's enhanced hearing picked up heartbeats from across the city that included supernatural beings, living openly alongside human neighbors who were learning that difference was not synonymous with danger, that children needed protection and love regardless of their physiological capabilities or inherited abilities that made them unique rather than threatening. Marcus's laughter echoed across rooftops while he demonstrated new abilities for parents whose pride transcended species boundaries. His joy somehow making their greatest challenges feel manageable when measured against moments like these that proved love was indeed the foundation for every other form of cooperation and understanding. The abandoned baby on floor 13 had become the child who symbolized hope for futures that seemed impossible until someone chose courage over comfort, protection over prejudice, family over fear that would have kept entire populations trapped in hiding that served no one's real interests. Elena smiled while watching city lights twinkle like fallen stars below them, her decision to protect one golden-eyed infant having created ripples that continued expanding across communities worldwide where other families were emerging from centuries of secrecy into the light of acceptance that made ordinary happiness possible for extraordinary children. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as integration continued expanding beyond their city to encompass global policies that would determine whether supernatural beings achieved full equality or remained marginalized despite documented proof that cooperation was not only possible but beneficial for everyone involved. Tonight was for family moments and garden sanctuary, and the miracle of watching Marcus grow up safely in a world that was slowly becoming worthy of his trust. Elena's greatest victory measured not in political achievements, but in bedtime stories read to a child who slept peacefully because adults had chosen love over fear when it mattered most.